It began, as evil often does, quietly. The summer of 1982 was warm in King County, Washington. The air smelled of pine and rain, but beneath the calm surface, the Green River was keeping a secret, one that would haunt the region for decades. One August morning, a young boy walking along the river spotted something strange floating in the water. At first, he thought it was a mannequin, pale, lifeless, tangled in the reeds. But as he got closer, he saw hair, a face. It was no mannequin. That discovery led to another and another. 5 bodies within weeks, all women, all strangled. The work of a monster, precise, methodical, invisible. For the next 20 years, he would terrorize Washington state, killing at least 48 women, maybe more. He would taunt investigators, slip through their grasp, and return to his quiet suburban home as if nothing happened. His name was Gary Ridgway. To the world, he became the Green River Killer. And his story is one of darkness, deception, and the horrifying truth about how evil can hide in plain sight. Seattle in the late 1970s was a city in transition, booming technology, the rise of Boeing, growing suburbs, and an expanding working class. But beneath the progress, there was another side to the city, one filled with drugs, poverty, and desperation. Pacific Highway South, known to locals as the Strip, was a dangerous stretch. Neon signs, motels, bars, and a constant flow of women working the streets to survive. Many were runaways, some escaping broken homes or addiction. They were young, vulnerable, forgotten. These were the women Gary Ridgway targeted. Born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah, Gary was the second of 3 sons. His childhood was ordinary at first glance, but behind closed doors it was anything but normal. His mother, Mary Ridgway, was domineering and strict. She often humiliated Gary, bathing him until his early teens, even when he was uncomfortable, scolding him about cleanliness and morality. She was beautiful, flirtatious, and volatile, and Gary's emotions toward her were twisted between love, fear, and resentment. His father, Thomas Ridgway, worked as a bus driver and often complained about prostitutes he encountered on his routes, planting an early seed of disdain in young Gary's mind. By age 16, Gary was already showing signs of disturbing behavior. He once stabbed a 6-year-old boy for no reason, leaving him to die in the woods. The boy survived, but Gary never faced serious consequences. After high school, Ridgway joined the Navy and served in Vietnam. When he returned home, he married, but his relationships never lasted. He was controlling, jealous, and obsessed with sex. To outsiders, he was just another working man, a quiet guy who painted trucks for a living and read the Bible on weekends. But inside, Gary was harboring violent fantasies. He was learning to blend in, to look normal, while planning how to kill. The killings began in 1982. Gary Ridgway's method was simple, chilling, and effective. He would drive along Pacific Highway South, looking for women alone, usually young sex workers or runaways. His approach was disarmingly friendly. He'd smile, show photos of his son, and promise money for a short ride. The victims felt safe until the doors locked. He would drive them to remote wooded areas, near the Green River or in dense forests south of Seattle. There, his voice would turn cold. He would strangle them, often with his bare hands, sometimes using ligatures like shoelaces or ropes. He told investigators later that strangling was more personal. It gave him control. It let him watch the life fade from their eyes. After killing them, he would dump their bodies in clusters, what investigators later called dump sites. He returned often, sometimes to move the remains, other times to perform necrophilic acts on decomposing bodies. For him, murder wasn't just about killing, it was about ownership, the ultimate domination. Weeks passed, then months. The numbers grew. By 1983, at least 13 women had vanished. Most were last seen along the same stretch of highway. Police began connecting the dots, and the name Green River Killer was born after more victims were discovered in or near the river. King County Sheriff's Department formed a dedicated unit, the Green River Task Force. Dozens of detectives, analysts, and profilers began working around the clock. But Ridgway was always one step ahead. He was careful, patient, deliberate. He knew which victims would be missed, and which wouldn't. He often placed their belongings miles away from their bodies to mislead investigators. And he continued to blend in perfectly. He married again. His third wife, Judith Mawson, saw him as a loving husband who mowed lawns, went to church, and loved his son. At home, he was quiet, polite, faithful. Outside, he was a predator, hunting in the dark. He later told investigators, "I wanted to stop, I really did, but the urge, it was just too strong." The investigation consumed the Seattle area for nearly 2 decades. Detectives interviewed hundreds of people, examined thousands of leads, and created the largest database of potential suspects in U.S. history at that time. One name kept reappearing: Gary Ridgway. He had been arrested for soliciting prostitutes. He matched a witness description. He even took a polygraph test in 1987 and passed. With no physical evidence, investigators had to let him go. As the years passed, technology evolved, but the Green River Killer remained a ghost. The FBI profiled him as methodical, organized, and local, a man who likely held a stable job, lived nearby, and targeted women he saw as disposable. The description fit Gary perfectly. Meanwhile, the media frenzy grew. Families of missing women protested, demanding justice. Fear gripped the region. For years, women avoided walking alone at night, knowing the killer was still out there. In a twist of irony, one of America's most infamous serial killers, Ted Bundy, reached out from death row to help. Bundy told investigators that the Green River Killer would likely revisit his crime scenes to relive the fantasy, advice that helped shape the task force's strategy. Still, the murders slowed, not because Gary stopped, but because he adapted. He learned from the news, avoided leaving traces, and picked victims even less likely to be found. By the 1990s, the case was cold. The task force was disbanded. Boxes of evidence collected dust in warehouses. The families of victims were left with silence. But in 2001, nearly 20 years after the first murder, a miracle of science reopened the case. Advancements in DNA technology changed everything. Detectives revisited old evidence, fibers, semen samples, hair fragments collected from victims in the 1980s. Using new forensic methods, they extracted partial DNA profiles. Those profiles were compared against modern databases, and in April 2001, a match came back. The DNA from several victims matched Gary Leon Ridgway, the man they had interviewed years earlier. After decades of hunting ghosts, detectives had a name, a face, a living suspect. They arrested him outside the truck factory where he still worked. The same man who had painted trucks for 30 years, eaten lunch with co-workers, and gone home every night to his unsuspecting wife. When confronted with the evidence, Gary Ridgway denied everything. But as more DNA results arrived, his facade began to crack. He eventually confessed, calmly, emotionlessly, to killing dozens of women. His words were haunting. "I killed them, and I don't remember all their names. They were just people nobody would miss." In total, he confessed to killing 71 women, though 49 were officially confirmed. He described each killing in clinical detail: how he chose his victims, how he strangled them, where he left them, and how he returned later to relive the moment. The confessions stretched over months. Detectives could barely keep up with his memory. They realized he wasn't lying, he was remembering. Every body, every location, every detail. In 2003, Gary Ridgway stood in court to face judgment. He was offered a plea deal, confessed to every murder he could remember, in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He agreed. For weeks, the courtroom heard his monotone recounting of murder after murder. Each name brought fresh tears from families in attendance. Some couldn't bear to listen, others stared at him with hatred, waiting for some sign of remorse. But Gary Ridgway remained stone-faced. He showed no guilt, no emotion. To him, these were not memories of horror, they were trophies of power. When asked why he targeted prostitutes, his answer was brutally cold. They were easy to pick up, and nobody cared when they disappeared. He described how he sometimes killed 2 women in the same day, how he marked his dump sites with colored stones, how he returned to corpses, sometimes weeks later, to fulfill his sick urges. The judge called his crimes the worst case of serial murder in US history. He was sentenced to 48 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus an additional 480 years. He will never leave prison. The Green River Killer's story is not just about one man's evil, it's about the failure to see it. For years, Gary Ridgway lived a double life: husband, father, employee, churchgoer, while committing unthinkable acts. He attended picnics, he smiled at neighbors, he prayed in church, and on weekends he hunted. Even his wife, Judith, refused to believe it at first. She told interviewers, "He was my whole world. I never saw anything strange." To this day, she lives with the unbearable truth that she shared a home with one of America's most prolific killers. His case forced police departments to rethink how they handled missing persons, especially women from vulnerable backgrounds. It reshaped the role of forensic DNA in solving cold cases. And it became a reminder that evil does not always look like a monster, sometimes it looks like a man next door. Gary Ridgway remains behind bars in Washington State Penitentiary, serving life without parole. In interviews, he sometimes smiles when recalling his crimes. He says he found peace with God, though his words ring hollow. The Green River still flows, calm, indifferent, eternal. But beneath its surface lies the memory of dozens of young women, lives cut short, stories untold. Their voices were silenced by one man's darkness. But through their names, through the tireless work of detectives, and through every story retold, they live again. Gary Ridgway didn't kill because he was insane. He killed because he could. Because he knew that the world wouldn't miss the people he chose. That is what makes his story terrifying. Not just the number of victims, but the truth it reveals about human blindness. Evil doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. And sometimes it lives just across the street.